April 1945, Bavaria, Germany. Margaret Hoffman stood blindfolded against the splintered wood of a barn wall, rope cutting into her wrists, waiting for the bullet that would end her life at 23. The SS officer's boots crunched gravel behind her. She could smell gun oil and hear the metallic click of rifle bolts sliding into place. 12 women stood shoulder to shoulder, all condemned as deserters by the regime they had faithfully served. Then came the sound of engines, not German, but American, roaring over the hillside. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked across the morning air. Rough hands tore the blindfold from her eyes, and Margaret screamed the only words terror would allow. "They're going to kill me. Please, they're going to kill me." The young American soldier lowered his rifle, looked into her eyes, and said in broken German, "No, you are safe now." In that moment, Margaret Hoffman's entire understanding of the world shattered. If you're captivated by true World War II stories that reveal the complex, contradictory nature of humanity during history's darkest hour, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, whether it's Berlin or Boston, Tokyo or Toronto. These stories matter because they show us that even in war, even between enemies, moments of unexpected grace can pierce through the darkness and change lives forever. Margaret expected death from her enemies. Instead, she found it waiting in the hands of her own countrymen. And when salvation came from the soldiers she'd been taught to fear, it began a transformation more painful than any bullet could have delivered. The Third Reich was devouring its own children. April 1945 brought warm winds across Bavaria, but they carried the stench of smoke, decay, and a nation collapsing inward upon itself. The Allied armies pressed from east and west, squeezing Germany into an ever-shrinking pocket of desperation. The Reich's response was not surrender, but a frenzy of violence directed at its own people. Deserters hung from lampposts with signs reading, "I am a coward," swaying beneath their boots. Flying courts-martial roamed the countryside, executing soldiers and civilians alike for the crime of wanting to survive. In those final weeks, more Germans died at the hands of their own government than from enemy action. Margaret Hoffman had served faithfully since 1942 as a Wehrmacht auxiliary telephone operator. She had spent 3 years connecting calls in Berlin, relaying orders during air raids, watching her city burn while she remained at her post. She had never fired a weapon. She had never questioned orders. She had believed, with the certainty of youth, that her duty was righteous and her sacrifice meaningful. But when the command came to retreat eastward toward the advancing Soviets, Margaret and 11 other women made a different choice. They walked west toward the Americans, hoping surrender would mean survival rather than the horrors whispered about the Eastern Front. The SS patrol found them on a dirt road outside Munich. Within an hour, they stood blindfolded against a barn wall, condemned as traitors. The irony was crushing. Women who had served the fatherland now faced execution by the very regime they had supported. The officer reciting their crimes spoke in the cold, bureaucratic language of official murder. As if reading a grocery list rather than pronouncing death sentences. The barn was old, its wooden planks already pockmarked with bullet holes from some earlier violence. Margaret stood between 2 women she barely knew, their shoulders touching in silent solidarity. The blindfold pressed tight against her eyes, creating absolute darkness that amplified every other sense. She could hear the woman beside her breathing fast, shallow, desperate. She could smell old hay and animal sweat mixed with something sharper, gunpowder and blood soaked into wood. The April wind cut through her thin uniform, and she shivered, though whether from cold or terror she could not tell. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing in impossible ways. Her entire life flickered through her mind in fragments, not coherent memories, but sensory flashes. The taste of her mother's apple cake. The sound of her brother's laughter before he left for Stalingrad and never returned. The feel of telephone switchboard keys under her fingers, connecting calls that sent men to their deaths. She thought of her mother in Hamburg, who believed her daughter was still alive. She thought of the bread she had baked as a child, the warmth of the oven on winter mornings. The officer finished speaking. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Margaret waited for the command to fire. Instead, engines broke the quiet, not the familiar growl of German vehicles, but something different, higher pitched, faster, American jeeps. Shouts erupted in German, then gunfire, but not the organized volley of an execution squad. This was chaos, running feet, bodies hitting the ground. More shots. Someone screamed. The woman beside Margaret collapsed against her, then slumped to the dirt. Hands grabbed Margaret's shoulders. She screamed, twisting against the grip, sobbing words she would remember for the rest of her life. "They're going to kill me. Please don't let them kill me." The blindfold was torn away. Bright daylight blinded her. She blinked through tears and saw a face inches from hers. A young man wearing an olive-green helmet with a white star. American. His eyes were blue, wide with shock, and his hands on her shoulders were surprisingly gentle. "You're okay," he said in clumsy German. "Safe. You safe now." Margaret could not comprehend the words. Her mind could not shift from death to life so quickly. Behind the soldier, she saw the SS officers on the ground, some dead, others with hands raised, surrounded by Americans pointing rifles. The execution squad had become the prisoners. Her legs gave out. The American caught her before she hit the ground. She was 23 years old, and in that instant she had been born again into a world that made no sense whatsoever. The hours after rescue blurred like watercolors in rain. Margaret and the surviving women 3 had been killed. When the SS opened fire during the American assault, were loaded onto trucks and driven through landscapes of destruction. Towns without roofs, churches without steeples, roads cratered by bombs and lined with burned tank holes. The American soldiers gave them blankets and water from their own canteens. One soldier, noticing Margaret's raw wrists where rope had cut into skin, carefully wrapped them with bandages from his first aid kit. He did not speak German. She did not speak English, but his hands were gentle, almost tender, and Margaret stared at him as if he were a creature from another planet. They arrived at a processing center that had once been a German army barracks. The buildings were intact, but now flew American flags. Soldiers moved with purpose, but without cruelty. The women were helped down from trucks, not shoved, not dragged, but helped and led inside. Margaret's heart raced when she saw where they were headed, a bathhouse. Memories of whispered rumors flooded her mind. Stories of what happened to prisoners in bathhouses, stories of gas and death and bodies stacked like cordwood. Her feet stopped moving. She could not force them forward. A female American officer, Margaret, had not known women could be officers, approached slowly, hands visible, and spoke in perfect German. "It is only a shower, hot water and soap. You are safe here, I promise you." The woman's eyes were kind, her voice steady. Margaret wanted to believe her, but could not silence the terror in her chest. Another woman from the execution line, a telephone operator named Elsa, took Margaret's hand. "If they wanted us dead, they would have left us at the barn," Elsa whispered. "Come." Together, they stepped inside. The room was tiled in white. Steam rose from shower heads along the walls. And in each woman's trembling hands, the Americans placed a bar of soap. White, thick, smelling of flowers. Real soap. Margaret had not seen real soap in over a year. Wartime bars were gray and gritty, made of animal fat and ash. This was different. This was beautiful. The hot water hit her skin, and Margaret began to cry. Not from fear this time, but from something she could not name. The dirt of weeks washed down the drain, the dust of bombed roads, the grime of hiding in cellars, the dried blood from the barn where she had almost died. She scrubbed her arms, her face, her hair, and with each stroke of the soap, she felt layers of war falling away. Around her, other women wept too. Some laughed through their tears, disbelieving. One woman held the soap to her nose and inhaled deeply, eyes closed, as if trying to memorize the scent of something that had once been ordinary and was now miraculous. Clean towels waited afterward. Clean clothes, simple gray dresses, but without holes, without stains. Margaret dressed in a daze. Hours ago she had been blindfolded, waiting to die. Now she stood clean and warm, wrapped in enemy fabric that felt softer than anything she had worn in years. She would later write in a small notebook she was given, "They washed away the war. They washed away my death. I do not understand these people. I do not understand anything anymore." The mess hall was larger than any room Margaret had eaten in since before the war. Long wooden tables stretched in neat rows, and the smell was overwhelming. Coffee, real coffee, not the bitter ersatz made from acorns and chicory that Germans had choked down for years. Bread, meat, butter, the aroma hit her like a physical force. Her stomach, empty for so long except for meager rations, cramped painfully at the scent of actual food. Saliva flooded her mouth, a response so primal it embarrassed her. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway. This had to be a trick, a final cruelty before real punishment began. They would let the prisoners smell the food, maybe even touch it, then take it away. But American soldiers behind the counter smiled and waved them forward. "Come, come," one said, gesturing with his ladle. "Eat." Trays were placed in their hands. Food was piled onto them. Thick beef stew with chunks of potato and carrot, slices of white bread with real butter, mugs of coffee with sugar. Sugar. Margaret had not tasted sugar in so long, she had almost forgotten its existence. The women sat at a table together, staring at their trays. No one ate. No one could bring themselves to take the first bite. Elsa was the first to move. She picked up her spoon, dipped it into the stew, and brought it to her lips. She chewed slowly, her eyes widening, and then tears began to roll down her cheeks. "It's real," she whispered. "It's real food." That broke the spell. The women ate slowly at first, then faster, then so fast they made themselves sick. Months of hunger demanded to be fed all at once. Margaret bit into the bread and had to press her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. The taste of butter, the softness of bread, the warmth spreading through her empty stomach. It was almost painful in its goodness. An American soldier walked by and paused at their table. He saw their faces of tears, the desperate way they clutched their food. His expression softened with something that looked like sadness. "More if you want," he said slowly, pointing to the counter. "More food, okay." Margaret looked up at him, this enemy offering her more food than her own country had given her in a year. She did not know what to say. She did not know what to feel, so she simply nodded and whispered, "Danke, thank you." The soldier nodded back, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not understanding, but the simple recognition of shared humanity. Days became weeks. Spring warmed into early summer. The women settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible just months before. They woke to a bell, not a siren. They ate breakfast, always breakfast, never just a rumor of food in the mess hall. They worked during the day and returned to their barracks at night. It was captivity, but nothing like the captivity they had feared. Margaret was assigned to the camp laundry. She washed American uniforms, sheets, and towels in large metal tubs with hot water and good soap. The work was hard, but not brutal. There were breaks for water, breaks for meals, even breaks to rest when supervisors saw exhaustion in a worker's face. The laundry room became her world. Steam rose from the tubs in thick clouds. The smell of soap and starch filled the air. The rhythmic scrubbing became almost meditative, a way to empty her mind of everything except the task at hand. She learned the names of her fellow workers, German women, from all over the Reich, each with her own story. Helga from Berlin, who had operated radar equipment during air raids, Maria from Dresden, who still woke screaming from nightmares of the firebombing, young Anna from Vienna, barely 18, who had been conscripted only months before the war ended. They worked side by side, sharing stories, sharing silence, sharing the strange experience of captivity that felt more like safety than any freedom they had known. The first time an American sergeant stopped the work line and said, "You look tired. Sit down for 10 minutes." Margaret thought it was a trick. In Germany, showing weakness meant punishment. Here, it meant rest. The inversion was dizzying. For their work, the women were paid not much small vouchers in camp currency, but payment nonetheless. They could spend these vouchers at the camp canteen, a small building stocked with items that seemed to belong to a different universe. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, pencils and paper, hand mirrors, lipstick, soap. The women stood before these shelves like pilgrims at a shrine, barely able to comprehend what they were seeing. Margaret bought a chocolate bar on her second week. She had not tasted chocolate since 1941. She unwrapped it slowly, reverently, and took the smallest possible bite. The sweetness exploded on her tongue, and she had to sit down because her legs went weak. She ate the rest of the bar over 4 days, rationing it, savoring it, mourning when it was gone. But even as her body adjusted to this new life of abundance, her mind could not find peace. Letters began to arrive mail, somehow finding its way through the chaos of post-war Europe. The women received news from home, and that news was devastating. Margaret's first letter came from a neighbor in Hamburg. Her mother was alive, but barely. The city was rubble. Their apartment building had been destroyed in the firebombing of 1943. The letter contained a small photograph of Margaret's mother, gaunt, hollow-eyed, standing amid the ruins of what had once been their home. The image haunted her. She kept it under her pillow and studied it at night, tracing the change in her mother's face, the jutting cheekbones, the darkness in her eyes. At the dinner table, surrounded by women eating beef stew and buttered bread, Margaret felt sick with guilt. "They boil grass for soup," she told Elsa. "Children fight over potato peels, and I eat beef." Every meal felt like betrayal. When a young American soldier asked why she wasn't eating, she showed him the photograph. He looked between it and her untouched plate. "I'm sorry," he said softly, one of the few German words he knew. She did not know what to do with an enemy's apology. Yet small moments of humanity broke through. Private Johnson, a black American soldier, helped her carry heavy laundry baskets, smiling a gap-toothed smile that disarmed her. Nazi propaganda had taught her that Americans oppressed their black citizens, yet here he worked and ate alongside white soldiers. They formed a wordless friendship of gestures and grateful nods. Then there was Lieutenant Morrison, the female officer who spoke perfect German and treated the women with unexpected respect. "You have rights," she told them, an idea the Reich had never offered. Some resisted. Ursula, a hardline believer, accused the others of weakness. "They give you chocolate and you become their dogs," she hissed. Yet weeks passed with nothing but routine food, cleanliness, warmth. The expected cruelty never came. The turning point arrived on a gray autumn morning. Lieutenant Morrison gathered the women and projected a film on a white sheet. At first, Margaret didn't understand the image's shapes, like stacked logs. Then she saw the truth: bodies, mass graves, living skeletons in striped uniforms. Dachau Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen. The women wept, retched, turned away. Margaret watched every frame, feeling something inside her break. She had been proud to serve the fatherland. Now she wondered if she had relayed orders that led to these deaths. That night she wrote, "Did I choose not to know?" When winter came, rumors of repatriation spread. Returning home terrified her. She felt transformed, burdened with truths her homeland might reject. "I fear leaving more than arriving," she wrote. Germany was a graveyard. Hamburg, her home, lay in ruins. She found her mother in a coal cellar, thin as paper, living among strangers. "They told me the Americans killed the women prisoners," her mother whispered. "No," Margaret said. "They saved my life." Years passed, Germany rebuilt. Margaret married a former POW who understood her silence. The camp stayed with her, the laundry, the chocolate, the blindfold torn away. In 1985, she finally told her story. Asked what she wanted people to know, she said, "Enemies are not always what you are told. Mercy is harder to survive than cruelty."